Hey, it's Chris. What are we talking about today? Divinus. Lucky Duck sent me a copy of this to talk to you about. Legacy style tile laying, modifying, sticker based Norse versus Greek god Pantheon game. What do you need to know? Again, mild spoilers throughout, but you need to get a good sense of the game. So I'm going to be showing you everything that you need to know, whether or not this is the next Legacy game you should pick up or pass. My thoughts after playing it all the way through. Let's go. Now again, in case you're not familiar, right? Tile laying Legacy game. How do you do that? How do you take two stacks of tiles like this, modify them, twist them around, make them objectively scoreable through 12 different scenarios with an app-based system to keep track of some stuff, which actually is relatively convenient here, and then make it long-lasting as well, with sort of a My City vibe of you end up with this game that is potentially replayable, mixed matchable, and given an infinite mode, if you will. So with this game setup, you have these two separate sets of piles that you are going to be including. And with your base game setup here, I'm just going to show you what it looks like. I'm going to give you a few nuances of the gameplay without going into too many spoilers, but then also a little bit of, okay, what changed when things went on? What did I like? What were some things that I thought worked? What were some things I thought didn't work? And ultimately, at the end, how do I feel about it? Would you ever go back to a Legacy game to play it after you finished it? That's always the thing I pose elsewhere. And so I'm going to try and answer that question as well for myself with this one. And so the tricky part, obviously, with a Legacy game is you kind of end up with stuff that you get rid of. Now, in this Legacy game, though, it's not exactly in that sense because, like I mentioned, you're going to be utilizing stickers, both on these, on the sides of the maps of the tiles that you're placing down, as well as in the rulebook. And what you end up essentially with is this very large folder of stickers at the beginning of the game. And you can see here that you just open it up and it says sticker sheets. Do not open until instructed. The app will tell you when to utilize it, right? And so then at the end of the game, you end up with a fair number of sheets that look like this. As you can see, this is where all the rules were that I pasted into the rule book. And now there's about 4 other sheets of this. And so I kept one just so you could see. And they're all numbered down here at the bottom, 7.08, 7.09, 7.06. And so then you say in the app, on this scenario, add this to this page and add this rule, or add this dynamic, or add this character, or add this something else. And so you're going to be having that, and it tells you the little introductory sheet how to do that. And some of your sticker sheets will inevitably end up like this, right? The various factions for the Greek and the Norse and the barbarians. And then you have different ones over here on the side that are event triggers that you will actually be placing onto the maps themselves, that when you then draft them later, it triggers an event in the app. And so again, unique events that are going to be happening, you're going to be utilizing your character and giving them some asymmetry depending on whether you favor the Greeks or the Norse, depending on what side of things you fall and how you score as things go along, as well as getting the ability to upgrade your character individually, not only via titles you can earn by discovering certain locations and exploring them later, but also artifacts that are going to give you asymmetric, one-time, or potentially multi-use abilities depending on how you're utilizing your mechanics as you're going along, that also coincidentally can be acquired from one part of the map and stickers and then upgraded from another. Again, trying not to show you too many spoilers there, but just the things that you're going to be utilizing. Now, the other aspect of this is that this is going to be a dice-driven tile laying game. And so you can see, or hear, you'll see in a minute, these are my dice that each character has, and you're given a set of dice to go along with that. But each faction of the Norse and the Greek have a unique faction die as well. Not only will you be able to upgrade your own dice and even potentially put stickers on the sides of your dice in forms of these icons, but also changing the actual numbers. In a number system of 1 to 6 in the base dice, you can throw in numbers like this, that now it's a 1 or a 12 or even a 7. Or I have 1, 3, and 5 I have on one of the dice, and I'll show you those in a minute as well. And then you're also going to have these other little icons. There are some fire icons, there are some vase icons, and all of them are going to be potentially adaptable and utilizable. Then the Norse and Greek dice that I also mentioned are going to have, depending on who wins a particular scenario or battle, the ability to upgrade. And spoilers on this one, as you can see, almost all the Greek ones are missing, and all the Norse ones, well, the Norse tide didn't do as well in our scenario campaign. But it allows you again to change the side, because you get to roll that dice along with your other dice when you re-roll to get a one-time demigod ability, because this game is predicated on rolling your dice, taking an action and having a potential sub action or mini action to go along with it. And as you go throughout the game, you're going to be unlocking additional mini actions to slowly customize the game, to give it more depth and to give you more strategic ability of choosing these tiles. And I showed you this one already, so we'll put this aside. So now what you do essentially at the beginning of every game is you take your stacks of tiles and you take 6 of them from each side and you just lay them out into these areas. And in case you can't see in this area, I'll blow it up in a second so you can kind of take a look and you can kind of see where I'm actually doing this and how it's going to look and be utilized at the end here. What you have is you have this grid-based layout. And as I go back out here, you can see that I've got 6 on this side and 6 on this side. And in case you didn't see in that blown up view, above each of these tile spaces, there is a number. And that correlates to the dice that you're going to be having in each of these characters. And so you can see now I've got my regular 6-sided die here. If I pull them all out, you can start to see that, what you do is you roll them all and you see what you get, right? And so these all correlate to what you need to do. And on your turn, you get to choose any number of dice and you play those dice to the corresponding area of the tile you want to pick up. So if I want to pick up this tile right here in the 4 spot, well, I can just play my 4 die. That would be there, and that die stays there occupying that spot until I run out of options or turns that I want to take, and then eventually I will grab all of my dice and I will re-roll them. This spot will then get refilled, and you just rinse and repeat that as the main basic action mechanism. The other thing that you'll be doing though is, let's say I don't have a 4, and let's say now I have a 5 and a 1, so I can subtract the 5 and the 1 to get 4 to again get this spot right there, or I can do 5 and 1 to get 6. So it gives you multiple ways of utilizing the dice to get the various tiles that you're going to be slowly collecting as you go along. And as you can see on these tile spaces, you've got a variety of different options. You've got the Greek and the Norse iconography on the side. You've also got the barbarians, and these are going to be where you start to have a lot of the scoring objectives in this game. They're going to be based along that, but these in particular, if you can't actually tell, but some of these are not actually placed there originally. That's a sticker right there. Then you also have these little places of wonder, which are going to be places where you get to put temples down where you can consecrate. Essentially, there are in-game scoring objectives. So have this many icons of the Greek in certain areas, or have a tile size, a la Carcassonne, of a land area in the green of 6, or have 4 areas of 4, things along those lines that you're going to be able to manipulate. The only rule when you're placing this in a king domino style here is, if we slide this out of the way, is that you have to create, in almost all of the scenarios, no spoilers here, you have to create a 4x4 grid, and that is the primary endpoint for every single round, is that when somebody completes their 4x4 grid, the round ends once everyone has taken equal turns. Placement though is, not nearly as hard, because the only thing that matters with placement essentially is that the sides, the left and the right sides, not the top and the bottoms, the left and the right sides have to be matching right here. So these lands have to be matching. This would not be matching. This would not be matching. I could not place this one over here. But I could, for example, not play it there, but then I could place it down here. Now, this doesn't have to match. I could actually place it just like this. But if I'm trying to make areas of a certain size and I want to make sure I can continue doing so, well, then I may try and make it match up. But you're gradually playing them into this area, creating your 4x4. And so, well, then why or how are you creating those 4x4s, Chris? Because you just said that there's plenty of objectives that you're going to be trying to match. Well, each round, the app tells you essentially you are drawing or receiving from your different scenario boxes gods from both of the pantheons. And in the beginning, you will have just one main god, but then it will start to utilize gods from previous scenarios to give you not only one set of scoring objectives on the Greek side and the Norse side, but a second one here on each column. So for example here, I took a couple cards, and this is actually from the Tartarus box. So when you have these conflicts going on, the Greek versus the Norse, one side wins, one side loses. The side that loses goes into this box, never to be played again through the scenarios unless you play the infinite mode at the end, because then the subsequent ones that win will be used as these secondary objectives as you go along. And so here, I'm going to show you a couple examples of what these may look like. So here we have 2. We have Aphrodite and we have Hell, and they just basically show you what you have to have. On the 4 columns that you're going to be having in your grid, Aphrodite wants you to score the most of these icons, the barbarians and the Greeks, in the left 2 columns. If you do, you get 2 Greek victory points. Hell, on the other hand, if you have the most barbarians minus the amount of Norse symbols you have, you get the points. And so again, it gives you a different dynamic. As I mentioned, several of these will be, okay, how many of these on rock do you have? Or how many of the largest size land in the first place. So all of them are going to be dynamically different. And as I mentioned, you're going to have potentially 2 every single round, a min, a max, and you're going to have to decide, do I want to focus on the Greek? Do I want to focus on the Norse? Because what side are you doing? Because your end game scoring is going to be for both of them. You know, you're going to be trying to maximize both, but you may not be able to, because at the same time, each of these scenarios is going to have different objective cards to go along with it, usually corresponding to, but not necessarily including, a Norse, a Greek, as well as a barbarian objective. And those are going to be additional ways to score points as you go along. Now, part of those, as you go further into the game, will delve a little bit differently, because you're also going to have the addition of, say, things like monsters or heroes that are going to give you asymmetric abilities, a la the artifacts I mentioned earlier, modifications, or the monsters that you're going to have to do in terms of objectifying them differently, in terms of completing them, or monsters that will sit on these tiles and either block access to these tiles or change the value of those tiles in the first place. And so this one, for example, may just, and I can't remember which one this is exactly, but there are ones that you cannot take this tile, or there are ones that maybe say change the value that's required to pick up the tiles next to it. So previously, this is the value 7 up here, but now it may be actually 7 plus 4, because everything orthogonal next to it requires 4 more. So I'd have to use 11 as the sum total of the dice to get this. But once I completed objective, I maybe get to move this. Or the other thing that this can do, for example, is maybe affect the dice that are in the empty spots on the row if the monster moves to that area, and now I'm maybe not going to get the dice back in the way I want. So there are different dynamic changes, again, without going into too many direct spoilers here, of how the interactions on the board are going to happen, along with these heroes, which won't traverse the spots on the board where you're laying them from, but they will be traversing your own individual map in order to help you achieve victory points, scoring, quests, or even the objectives for the round in the first place. Now, I showed you the sticker map earlier. What I've got here is one example of some of the temples here that actually get placed on some of these tiles that you can actually see over those little places of wonder that I mentioned earlier. And again, these are in-game objectives that you are trying to fill only on your individual map. So I need to have 3 of these icons in a grass area. Now, an area I didn't actually define, but an area is at least a space made up of 2 of the similar touching, land masses, or similar style terrains, if you will. And so if you fulfill these, if you consecrate these, not only will these trigger abilities, they will also give you scoring victory points in an additional point salad, point buffet type of way, in addition to the other ones I've mentioned in terms of the gods and goddesses that are going to be available, the objectives that are going to be available, and now these on your tile map as well. And some of it may even be get this many types of temples consecrated or, achieved in the first place. So again, the variety of how you're scoring points as things go along definitely develops, and you get a sense of, okay, I'm getting better at manipulating this. You get a sense of better of, figuring out what needs to go where, and just how I'm going to achieve that in this very limited 4x4 grid as you go along, King Domino style, like I mentioned. Now, I didn't talk about the rulebook too much here, but this rulebook is, relatively extensive, and it's relatively complete, and it runs you through some of the actions and all of the gameplay content that you need to know. It even gives you a glossary here at the end if you want to see sort of, again, what is what, as well as the app. I will mention that the app really defines things very, very well. And so if there's any ambiguity of how these things are played in the narrative of the app, or the actual gameplay of maybe how those individual gods score, or how the monsters get in your way, or anything along those lines, the glossary on this app is probably one of the best I've ever seen. It takes all of the ambiguity out of it. I mean, you kind of wish it was in here in the first place, but it's very, very easy to use. You enter in the quests that you've achieved and the player who achieved them, because the other thing I didn't mention about all of these little quests on an individual basis, right, is that only one person gets to achieve them. And so once one person achieves them, you enter it in on the map, and it's gone then forever for everybody else. And that's something that you may or may not like depending on the player count, because if there's only 2 or 3 objectives per round and you're playing with multiple people, well, it's going to be difficult. And the game Blessing Curse as well that goes along with this, if you're looking at my tiles here, these are all the 2-player tiles. I played this game exclusively with 2 players, with my wife and I. And so there are a whole set of additional tiles that you don't even utilize, more from a massive amount needed at the higher player counts rather than there's different tiles in that sense. There's really not. You're just getting more of a quantity to be appropriate when you start making those 4x4 grids, as you can imagine. Now, as I mentioned as well with this, let me show you a couple examples of the modified dice by the end of the game, because what you're going to end up with dice like this, right? And so here are my dice, and you can see, right, like 4, 7, 5, 12, 6, that's a 6, not a 9, and then a 1 and 11, so I didn't really put my stickers on well there, but then you can start to see as well, I have a 2, 4, and a 6 there, 2, 4 with a sword, I won't tell you what that is, but it's useful, 3, 8, and, you know, again, all sorts of different modifiable dice, and so the combinations that you can make with those numbers now, with the addition and the subtraction, really matters. Your little tokens that I mentioned that you're putting on the temples in the first place once you achieve them in your areas, that are also going to come into objectives when you fight monsters as well, because fighting monsters is going to be an additional subroutine action that you can take in addition to your main action of placing your tiles. And so how you acquire those stickers, how you acquire those temples, how you acquire those different spots on the board of the numbered areas that I mentioned at the beginning, those are all sort of part of the subroutines that you can potentially run in addition to the main action of grabbing your tile and going. And so as you go along, things change, things develop, there's a little bit more strategy. So let's talk about my pros and my cons. Again, without spoiling too much here. The pro is that, yeah, as you develop through the scenarios, you do get a better sense of progression. You do get more of a fullness of what I'm doing, ways of going about it, mitigating it, strategizing, having to deal with multiple objectives. You do get better at it. There is a sense of, you know, actual progression there. On the flip side, though, I'll make the argument that because they've gone to such great lengths to make this, you know, adding, you know, the first couple games, to be honest with you, the first 2 or 3 scenarios, they're a little lackluster. You're kind of like, what am I doing here? Like, kind of just wished that the first 2 or 3 scenarios were all just, right? Almost too simplified, because there just wasn't enough going on. And the other aspect that I have to talk about here is the pro and con of these tiles, right? These tiles are going to be dramatically different, like which tile, which area that these temples go on, or which symbol gets added to this one right here, as opposed to, you know, over here, and what part you decide to put it on, because sometimes, you know, this one might be the only one on there, so I could have added the other sticker here, or I could have added it here, or sometimes you can overlap them and overlay them in that sense. I could put this one over that, so you're going to end up with a different situation and dynamic in how these are going to be different in every single game that's put out there, as you just kind of randomly add the stickers, because that's the other side of things, right? Is there's not a whole lot of rhyme or reason to adding these stickers, right? It's not like, well, I want to add this specific temple to this specific outline of the terrain, or I want to add this sticker to the water instead of over the mountains here. You don't really ever get a sense of, should I do that or shouldn't I do that? Because as you're going along with those objective cards that I mentioned of the various gods and goddesses, right? You don't really know which ones you're going to be needing and what combination. And so there's not any way to predict that. You're just kind of randomly getting 2 different scoring objectives, 4 actually, each scenario, and saying, oh, okay, where I place those stickers on the main piles of the reserve in the first place in this game, well, doesn't really have a whole lot of bearing, or there wasn't a lot of strategy at all putting these stickers on. It was just kind of putting them on to fill spots. So how do you feel about that? And again, these titles are nice, right? Like, I got all these titles for discovering these places, but they don't really terribly give you a whole lot. The artifacts are very helpful, but you only start out with 2 of these 4 unlocked, and then they just decide randomly halfway through the game and halfway through this number of scenarios that, oh, by the way, these first 2 are open, these other 2 are locked, and all of a sudden we're just going to unlock them for everybody. And you're kind of like, okay, why wouldn't I just have all 4 of these unlocked from the begin with? Or why is there not an achievement to do that based on? So, I mean, again, stuff like that you're just going, okay, well, I understand why you did it, because you want me to be able to have all these artifacts to manipulate things better and to have more control, but there wasn't really a rhyme or a reason about why and when I unlocked it in the first place. So that may bother you, it may not, because then you just also get different abilities to manipulate this, right? So every time I fight, for example, I get to refresh dice. And so you're going to have the ability to not only roll these dice, place them out into these locations to gather these tiles, but occasionally you'll be able to draft them back without having to take your turn as resting to gather them all back, because that's essentially like when you have some of those fighting card games, right, where you don't or can't play anything else and you have to rest to gather all your cards back up off the table. Well, that's what you're doing with the dice. So if you have abilities that allow you to not have to do that as frequently, that can really be beneficial. And that's the other tricky sticking point, is with those Pantheon dice, with the Greek die as well as the Norse die. If you're the winner of one of those in terms of each scenario, if you have the most points for the Greek, if you have the most points for the Norse, you get that extra special die, which at a 2-player count like we did, like, you always get one. But if you're playing with a 3 or 4 player count, there's a good chance that you may just not get any. And it gives you additional benefit because those dice really allow you some additional ways to mitigate, like I was just talking about. And there's even an extra special separate Pantheon die, which is just number 1 through 6 in Roman numbers. And again, you get that kind of if you're behind. So it gives you a little bit of a catch-up mechanic there too, but it doesn't maybe mitigate it as much as you would like, because again, you can't really modify that one, unlike these that I can throw all sorts of crazy numbers onto in the first place. Similarly, I mean, you're going to have heroes and you're going to have monsters, and it's a plethora of stuff, right? And the monsters are kind of nice in terms of the manipulation on the board here. The heroes, again, you know, they have little asymmetric abilities, but to be honest with you, it probably felt like the most disconnected mechanic as a whole, because it was just another way to give me a separate, unique asymmetric ability that the artifacts that I already mentioned on that I'm gathering here are available to. Now, the only difference is that you're not guaranteed to get these artifacts, as opposed to the heroes. When once enough heroes get unlocked, you do a draft style and everybody gets one. But again, their powers, comparatively, to be frank with you guys, it's not really as good as the artifacts. And again, the artifacts are a little kind of all over the place too, because there's some artifacts that can get upgraded and get a second part of the sticker laid over them, and there's some that just don't. And so which ones you get are kind of randomly determined on where you go. And sometimes if you have one of these places, I didn't actually show one here, but we'll pull one up here. This is what a location tile looks like. It has this little sticker on it, and it has a number icon. So if you draft this tile after it's already been played in a previous round, then you enter this location into the app and it has an event. But the events even are kind of all over the place. Sometimes you get a benefit, you get to put a sticker down. Sometimes everybody gets to put a sticker down. Sometimes you get to refresh a die or get a die back. Sometimes everybody does. So it's not even necessarily something that you're going, oh, I need to get this one, right? Because it may benefit you, but it may just benefit everyone. So if you hadn't have taken it, you still would have gotten the benefit, but you really only need to take it because did it give you anything from the outside, either the terrain that you needed, or did it give you any of the other icons that you may have needed as well? And that becomes ultimately more important. So it's very weird in that sense that I was like, okay, at first I really wanted to pick those up. And as the game went on and kind of the random effects happened, I mean, yeah, they were beneficial, but at the same time, if the tiles themselves weren't more beneficial in terms of the scoring objectives for the gods, they really were sort of quite secondary as well, which is kind of disappointing when you have a narrative-based game and they make this big narrative speech about, you know, what's going on at that temple or that event, and you get this little special title on the other side that says, you know, now I am the Eye of Truth, or the Herald of War, or the Barbarian Architect, and then you kind of go, okay, well, you get to refresh a die now. Oh, and then by the way, once you've played this one, you rip it off at a tile itself, and then it's never utilized again, because if you noticed that sheet I showed you at the beginning here, some of these are off, and sometimes you just don't hit them, and you sometimes will go to those areas, and then once you go to them once, they're gone completely, and you get to take the sticker off. So it's not difficult at all, right? Like, there's no issue of you like losing components in that sense, but there is some just sticker on, sticker off, sticker on, sticker off, sticker on, sticker off. And how do you feel about that? Does it really make a difference to you? It didn't really to us, but it was just kind of one of the bigger disconnects we had mechanically speaking as a whole. Again, not bad, but just like, if it wasn't there, would we have missed it? Same thing with the heroes. That's the biggest criticism I can make about both those. So what does this look like though on the inside of the box? Well, as you can see here are your 12 scenario boxes. And so they lay it out very nicely Each of these boxes are going to have cards. You actually store all of the heroes that stayed and did not die or lose the conflicts in each of the scenarios back in the box number 1. And so it'll tell you to take out, say, like Hermes or Ares from this box and put them with the one here from number 4 or number 5 as you're going through this. And they're all laid out. They all have their individual components in them. And again, it plays up to 4, so you can see the other box here with the other character. And again, let me just show you here without going into too many spoilers. This is sort of the deck that you end up with at the end here of just these varied different gods at the end of both combination of Norse and Greek. And you can kind of see that, oh yeah, I mean, you end up with both, and it's just still, it's a ton. And so with so many of this, right, that's the blessing at the end of the game. If you wanted to just randomly pull these tiles out and do your own 4x4 grid and randomly pull out anywhere between 1 and 3 of these on each side, you could easily do that. And that's sort of the endless game mode at the end, is you just kind of get the ability to do that. And that leads me to the beginning question of this game that I threw out there, right, is would I play this tile laying game again from a, purely, this is now my infinite mode, this is what I'm going to come back to, and I'm going to modify or just pick random, objectives and try and optimize it? And you totally could. At the same time, I'm not sure I would at this point. Now, I can't speak to what the expansion adds to this or how much variability or extra mechanically speaking it's going to give. But I don't also go like, okay, this is like super, super wow at the end. I like the dice mechanic a lot. The dice mechanic is rather clever. I was really wondering how this was going to utilize, because it's just kind of like use all your dice, but then at the end you're going to start to see that, spots are going to be missing or spots are going to be filled, and you're only going to roll like this, and you're going to have, 3 5s and a 6 and, another 6, and now you can really only get 6 minus 5 is 1, or a 6, or the 5, or a 10 or 11. And so as those spots get used up, especially at the higher player counts, you may have to re-roll before you've used half your dice, which again may put you behind in terms of filling out your 4x4, because you also get extra victory points when you're the first person to fill up, or if you fill up your 4x4 at the round's end. So it's another dynamic scoring, and if you're 3 or 4 tiles behind, not only is it not going to get you that completion bonus, but it's going to be a lot harder to fulfill a lot of these other end round scoring conditions that are based on primarily the tile arrangements and the icons on the tiles in the first place. And so how do you feel about that dynamic as well? The monsters are take that. There is some take that there, and you just need to be aware of it, because you're going to be placing them on the tiles, potentially affecting other people's abilities to draft tiles in the first place, or potentially in 1 or 2 scenarios burn their dice and not allow them to get their dice back quite as easily. So it's not a huge major portion of things, but it happens in a couple scenarios. So if you don't like it, you can easily not include that monster in a future game, but you're going to have to deal with it at least once or twice. And do you care? Does it really make that big a difference if it's only in that small of a portion of a, scenario? I didn't go through a few of the other minor things. There's a forge over here. There's the temples that you're drafting onto these tiles in the first place over here as minor actions that you can take depending on what your major action is, either resting or grabbing tiles. And this forge over here is another way that you get the little stickers on the sides of the dice in the first place. And so again, you get ways to mitigate it, not only in between rounds, but also during rounds if you're not happy with what you're getting as well. So that is Divinus in a nutshell. I don't know. I went into it saying, legacy tile laying. I like the idea of it. Was it as good as I was hoping? Probably not, to be honest with you. Was it fun? Yeah. Did it get to be a little bit much by the end of the 12th scenario? It did at the same time. Because as you went along, there were more and more things you were keeping track of. And some of the combinations of those gods on either side, sometimes they worked very synergistically and you could really get a good feel of trying to do multiple of them. And sometimes they were just so clashing that you really kind of either had to go for one or the other of all 4. Not even barely even maybe 2. Because there's just so much dynamically different between them. And there wasn't a whole lot of rhyme or reason always of which ones got paired with which ones, because it also was different depending on which ones were sent to Tartarus and which ones were kept around based on previous scenarios. So you could totally customize it at the end if you wanted to and play again, but in the throes of it, you weren't going to have as much of that, and that could be really frustrating to people. It's going to be easier though, overall, than probably most other legacy games to just pick up and play. Like If I pulled this out in scenario 5 or 6, I could easily explain the rules to you, the nuances and the mechanisms, and it wouldn't be too much, because even though you're adding stuff, it's cohesive, and it's more like you're just missing stuff until about 3/4 of the way through the game, rather than you're adding too much and trying to, catch up if you'd only played one game earlier versus one game later, if that makes sense. So you could easily just pick up one in the middle, maybe not use maybe some of the artifacts, and you'd be pretty much fine. So I guess, how does that make you feel? Is it really as legacy then if you could do that a little easier, as opposed to picking it up, in a different legacy style game? And if you hadn't played, it would be more of a detriment, right? It means ease of access from that style of things, but not maybe as legacy if you're really looking for that overarching difference of, wow, this is going to be different as we go along. The legacy in the sense that, yeah, I mean, things are going to be modifiable and it's not going to be the same in anything, but it's also going to be, not something you couldn't join halfway through as well. So that's Divinus. Those are my thoughts. That's where I stand. And, you can buy a recharge pack. I'm not sure I would bother with it. And I'm also not sure that I would necessarily go back to it at this point to play ad nauseum. That's partially because of the game, but you know what? That's also partially my own bias. I'm going to put that out there, because I am also not a person that goes and watches shows again. Like, people go and watch Parks and Rec, or they go and watch Seinfeld or Friends, right? 3 or 4 times through. I don't do that. So the replayability from that aspect of things, for me, my own bias leans against that. So when I say I wouldn't go back to it, it's not just as simple as I didn't like it or I wouldn't want to play similar to it, but I just don't do that. I have seen what it offers, and you're going to change the combinations, but for me, I don't feel the desire, at least in that sense. So hopefully that clarifies things. It's not just a pure, like, he doesn't like it and he's saying he's not going to, it's more complicated and more nuanced than that, but hopefully that at least lets you know where I'm coming from too. So there you go. My thoughts on Divinus. Let me know how you think, or what else you want to know down below. That's how I feel. Thank you, Lucky Duck, for sending me a copy, and have a great freaking day. Stay classy. Subscribe if you want. I got more of this coming up. Check it out.